Good morning. Good morning. Okay, can I just start off with a quiz? Very simple quiz. You will get something from Pauline at the end. A quiz on Vincent's presentation. Very simple one. How many times did he say the world has changed or the world is changing? There were many variations on that sentence. If I counted all the variations, it will be 10 variations. But I just want your answer on how many times he said the world has changed or the world is changing. Maybe the first, Amos? How many times did he say the world has changed? Okay, anybody else?
He has quoted about 40 times.
40 times. Wow, that's that's really. Vincent, would you like to verify? You said it 40 times. Okay, I counted 3 times the world has changed and once the world is changing. Okay, so unfortunately nobody got the correct answer. But the world has changed, and it's not only technologies which have changed, but the behavior has also consequentially changed. For example, nowadays we are very comfortable in getting into a car with complete strangers. we are very happy, staying in houses belonging to other people, or lending money to someone across the world on the other side of the world, where we do not have any personal knowledge of. Okay, why do we trust the likes of GrabHitch or Airbnb or Kickstarter? What do they do to get this trust from their customers? Okay, how do we build trust within organizations and how do we maintain it? So this is what the panel is going to discuss. And of course, there were long introductions just given, but just to recap, we've got Mark Jansen here, who's from PwC. He's a digital trust guru, the digital trust leader from PwC. Can you guess how many people are in his team just doing digital trust? He tells me it's about 100. He's got 100 people within his team. So that's how important digital trust is to PwC. Of course, we've got Ganesh. Ganesh is here, very important man because he's going to give the CFO perspective. Most of the people in the audience here are actually CFOs or equivalent accounting and finance managers. So we would like to have the CFO perspective from Ganesh, who's the regional vice president from SAP covering Asia and Japan. And of course, we have Faye, who's the head of business insights, and she has done groundbreaking work on studying, how the skill sets of accountants would have to change and evolve in the changing technological landscape and other landscapes, and she will bring in her inputs on this. And of course, you heard about you heard Vincent's presentation on the expanding digital world and the digital natives which are inhabiting that world. Now, if I look around, actually in the audience, there are participants from FedEx, right? Jones Lang LaSalle, and also Dell. Now, all these companies have made statements about trust. Okay, I think FedEx, you may be quite familiar with it. They say that nothing is more important to their success than trust. Jones Lang LaSalle says that the #1 rule in their vested relationships framework is trust. And of course, Dell says it is using social media to build trust. So all these companies have been talking about trust. It seems that trust was always the lifeblood of businesses. So the question the first question I'd like to pose is really, what has changed? Why is now trust at a premium? Why do we say trust in the digital age is even more important? What are the circumstances that lead to Mark Jansen having 100 people within his team looking at digital trust? So maybe I'll just turn to the prettiest one in the panel to answer this question. Okay, what has changed? Okay, is there some debate on who's the prettiest?
No debate. Just got
working. So trust is becoming more important for me for one reason, and you probably know what it is. Business today, you can't hear. Ew, I'm not kissing the mic. So why is trust becoming more important? I think from Vincent's presentation, it's clear that accessibility, the way we can access information, how we can actually start businesses right from nothing. We don't no longer need a corner shop. We don't need those relationships. You can actually have your own business online. And you've seen how many people have actually used Airbnb, which JJ just opened. Raise of hand actually used Airbnb facilities. No one? Are you all that skeptical? So one. There's also, or did an Uber share cars? Anybody? A couple people? And did you trust that service? Yes. And why did you trust that service? Hearsay? Friends? All right. But then the likelihood of it's being used because people are trusting it. But how is that trust being built? Actually, there may not be any trust, but through other means or through like social media, like Dell, they're using it to build trust. So trust is becoming even more important in the digital economy. It's actually so-called, we had before data as a new currency. Trust is the upcoming currency, or it's already the current currency. It becomes even more important. In the UK, where I'm from, you can share dogs. How cool is that? Imagine, I have a dog, I love dogs, but I can't actually, because I'm traveling, I can't actually afford a dog, and poor dog will have to be at home. So I can actually share a dog during the weekend. Can you imagine you sharing your dog to a complete stranger? But it's actually a sharing economy, and you see that more and more. So I think, and that's where trust is being built, and how we actually trust one another.
Can I answer that question a little bit differently? Can I answer this a little bit differently? I think that the only thing has changed is that formerly we only deal with people we can see and we know. Okay? The digital world has enabled us to deal with people very far away that we can see only on a picture or on a diagram, but it's not a real person in that sense, okay? And that's where you need to trust that you are actually talking to a real person. And I think that is a big difference in regards to now versus formerly. Formerly, we only buy things from people we can see. You go to a shop, you buy it, you physically hold it. Now you can buy things remotely. You can see it on the diagram, that sort of thing. But you have to trust that things actually exist or the person exists. And that's how we are willing to give money. And I think that is the difference now versus previous.
I mean, I agree 100% with what Vincent just said there. I think the big shift in today, and if you think about Singapore, and just a small anecdote, I've lived in Singapore for a long time. I moved to an apartment. My wife wanted to look at getting security. So I rang up Cisco and said, how safe is my street? When's the last time it was burgled? Did anyone burgle in the last 10 years? The answer was 0. So I said, fine, get me the cheapest security alarm possible. But now as you use security alarms, you use devices in your home, these are all connected to the internet. The big thing now is my street is not my street. My street is the world. And therefore I have to think of it from the world. So that connectivity is the world, and it's not even the people we see in the piece of paper, it's the people we don't see. So I think that's the real paradigm shift as organisations with IoT, so Internet of Things, Industry 4.0, as companies more and more automate, they rely on technology more so than ever before, but the way that technology is connected is very threatening, but also offers a lot of power and opportunity. So understanding that's critical. So what's really changed is that level of connectivity, the fact we're day in, day out connected, and therefore exposed to things, both good and bad.
Let me put another twist to it. I think trust has always been in business, and it's been there. It's just that if you look at it over the years, we've either trusted the church, the state, the government, the corporation, and it was what we call institutional trust, and they developed brands. Over the years, some brands have let people down, and with the advent of technology now, the whole trust is now become more a collective experience, just like what we're talking about now. It's not enough if you just have faith that say I listened to something on CNN and know it's true, but it's also the experience of knowing that I used Airbnb, I used Uber, and I got the value. Just the whole collective experience is now transformed from the institution which used to represent a brand, and everyone said this is trust, and I trust this brand, and now it's gone down to this collective experience, and that collective experience is visible largely because of social media, and people are looking, and then they start saying, oh my God, so many people have had such a good experience on it. And that is really what is now, the trust is staring at us in the face when you look at the scores, when you look at whatever you say, how am I doing, and net promoter scores, what have you. All these measurements are now, trust translates into how do collectively people feel about the experience on dealing with me as a service provider, as a corporation. And for example, like one point of time, we said brands really matter. You know, you could take a brand to the bank. And the stories we're hearing about, Airbnb and Uber, nobody even knows their logo, like the Coke logo or the Pepsi logo. It's a whole different experience now, how trust is being developed.
Yep, thanks. Okay, so the audience are basically, you know, many CFOs, many finance managers, many accounting managers. Vincent has spoken about the, you know, the digital trust framework, you know, with a lot of boxes and everything else. You know, CFOs work, you know, it started off as accounting and finance, then they threw in IT, then they threw in cybersecurity. Now we are taking a step back and looking at even a bigger picture, right, as what was painted by Vincent. And the question now is, as a CFO or finance or accounting person, what is your role in developing and maintaining trust in the organization? How do we translate that big circle into that, you know, that big circle where you showed all the components of the framework to your work, to your role as a CFO? Maybe Vincent, you can elaborate on that first.
I think at the end of the day, CFO, as you said, is in charge of financial statement, but they are also in charge of control within the organization and the effectiveness of the control within the organization. And what that circular table tells you is basically making sure that you need to think about the risk in all those different boxes and what are the controls around those risks to help you to mitigate the risk. Okay, and I think that's what I like to bring across in terms of, and the role of the CFO in the digital transformation, one is to make sure that money is properly well spent. Secondly is that there are control within the organization that will protect the organization from those risks that are out there.
Faye, maybe you could elaborate on the skill sets and the competencies.
I think, yeah, absolutely. So when we did the global study, which we did a couple of years ago, which we spoke to over 2,000 CEOs, CFOs, and C-suite executives, and technology is one of the biggest issues. And going back into how businesses are changing and the importance of trust, we're seeing that our technical and ethical compass is actually still the bedrock of a profession. However, it's no longer sufficient. We will need to start using our different skills, such as our vision, our digital quotient, as well as using more ethics, because that's pretty much the building block of trust. And why do I say that? Finance professionals do have integrity, yes. We have integrity, yes. We are ethical, correct, yeah? And we have the mindset, and those are pretty much the building blocks of trust, and that's why we are always seen as stewards within the business. So that's where I think on how finance professionals can help businesses build trust, whether it's looking at their data, looking how secure they're stored, looking at their provenance, where did they come from, are they clean data or are they rubbish data, as Vincent mentioned earlier, rubbish in, rubbish out. So there's a lot of roles and a lot of competencies that finance professionals can have, that they have in their toolbox, but then just reusing them in a different way.
So Ganesh, how do you build trust from the finance function, you know, within the organization? How do you see your role as?
I want to concur with both of them, what they're saying. How many of, before I answer the question straight, how many of us know here the father of double entry bookkeeping?
LP, right?
Okay.
Oh,
Luca Pacioli, in 1495 or so, he was a Franciscan monk. He was a mathematician, right? Was he? Okay. Maybe he found home in Florence as well. So no, you're right. There was some probably, but it didn't get well spread. But what did happen and got written in history was this Franciscan monk wrote a book on mathematics and had one chapter which dealt with double entry bookkeeping. So what did happen then was a bunch of accountants, based in Florence, adopted that. And it was the name eludes me. It was the family which sort of built churches and monasteries in the Medici family, yes. The Medici family was very successful there, and they had a lot of banks, and they adopted this technique of accounting in the banks and made a significant difference, and they were a head and shoulder above. It brought the competitive edge into that business, and that's what CFOs did, custodians of financial statements, but also then brought the cutting edge. So what I think today, to answer your question now, the difference we make is we have the skill sets, we have the integrity, we have the grooming, we know we can make a difference. It is now the need to be a transformation agent, to recognize that someone has to sort of make a big jump and leap in faith and recognize there are gaps here, there are risks here, there is governance requirements here, and say, let me act as a catalyst in the organization. And that's what most of us are now required to do, stand up and own and say, this is my space. Because at the end of the day, the bulk of the organization's information is owned by us as custodians. We sort of have responsibility for it. And it's a natural fit with what we do. And just to give you a page of what we're doing, how we're sort of going to extend what we do. We do what is called a digital boardroom presentation to CFOs, and where we say how you can run a business digitally and even run a board meeting digitally. And everyone doesn't have to be in a room, just sort of as an eye-opener, and how technology is enabling it. We can adopt it to sort of make a difference, but also recognize there are risks associated with it. And that's only one organization which can make that possible today, with the responsibilities which are there in the company, and that's a CFO.
Yeah, Ganesh, you seem to be implying that CFO should take a lead. You know, it is often said that CFOs are the ethical conscience of the organization. I mean, in CFO seminars we say that, but of course in other seminars, you know, it depends on who's hosting the seminar. But in most CFO seminars, we say the CFO is the conscience of the organization. So I think it puts the CFO in a very good place to carry out this digital trust, agenda, as it were.
Absolutely. And in most organizations, CFOs, the roles of governance, risk, compliance dovetail into the CFO. So it's really a real logical fit, and that lead has to come from the CFO's office so that they make a unique difference in the marketplace.
Mark, would you like to? Sure.
Maybe just some different perspectives as well. I mean, I think when you look from a CFO perspective, one of the things you've got to understand is what is the value of trust? So very simply, what is the goodwill your company is valued on? How does that change if that trust is broken? And not many people actually understand that clearly. That goes to understanding what is the value of the data you have in your organization? How do you secure valuable data versus less valuable? So again, I like keeping on my house analogy. When I protect my house, I have a front door lock, I have my security alarm, but my valuables are actually in a safe. So some of my valuables are actually go through different levels of security. So understanding from a digital trust standpoint, the CFO's role is actually to understand the value of what I have in my organization, what is my key IP, what is not. But then for my consumers, my customers, my suppliers, how I integrate with them and what the goodwill around trust of that is. They're things which can't necessarily easily attach values to, but it's important because if you understand that, then it's easy to put priority and process around these things. It's important the communication with the board to be able to articulate clearly the consequence and why these things are valuable and what's topical. Because one of the challenges on digital trust, and it's been a historic challenge, is that people are very good at putting seals on their organisations, on sites, and saying, you can trust me. Or people say, it's my business, so of course you should trust me. But we've seen many failures that actually, even though there is a trust seal there, still fail. So understanding that organisation is quite critical.
Yeah, Mark, you mentioned the board, I think in our own research, we also find that, frequently CFOs will say that, unless the board supports me, I can't do anything. So what is the role of the board in developing and building digital trust? I mean, maybe to Vincent and Mark and Ganesh, in Singapore, right, when you go to the, when you present yourself to the boards of listed companies in Singapore, what is your sense of their awareness of the, of building digital trust?
So maybe just, I think as we present to boards and meet, I think the awareness is increasing rapidly. I think it's something that needs to continue to evolve. I would challenge on boards and say, okay, many years ago, if you go back sort of a decade or so ago, boards were challenged to have a financial expert on the board. Now it's critical to understand digital on the board. That's part of the role for everyone. But that's a challenge. So I think boards
do they ask questions relating to digital trust, and do they ask their risk committee questions relating to of course security, yes, but to go beyond that to digital trust?
Yes, I think the questions are starting to come more. So I think that awareness is stepping up as organisations build capacity, but probably fair to say it's still got a long way to go as well.
Can I add something here? Because I was actually presenting at the SID conference yesterday, and they did a poll with the company and also with the directors. What was interesting is that 70% of the company are confident in regards to what they are doing for digital trust. Conversely, only 50% of the board are confident in terms of what they are doing in regards to digital trust, which I find it quite surprising, because I would expect the board have actually more confidence, because the board doesn't really have to do anything. They just have to make sure they ask the right question. It's the company that has actually to have to do it. And so we spend a lot of time talking about why is there a difference between the board perception in terms of how confident they are dealing with digital trust, and also how company are doing that. And maybe the difference is that I think the board know about digital trust. The question is that maybe they would not know what type of question they should be asking or challenging the organization, and how to make sure that they have an impact in terms of the organization strategy in regards to digital trust.
Yeah.
I think in the context of Singapore itself, and if you've been here long enough, and everyone remembers the DBS ATM issue, July 2010, where it was a breach of trust. Guys went to withdraw money from the ATM, and it wasn't working. And they couldn't withdraw trust, and there were some other episodes. And guess what? Trust had to be restored. And it can't be that a board is not aware of that episode. It was at the grassroots level. And guess what had happened to restore the trust? The MAS had to step in, right? So if you ask me, the board is very well aware of what's going on, but you're right, maybe the nuances, the gravity of what it means for my business, that probably needs some more mining and some more comprehension.
So very varied feedback on that question from boards which are becoming more aware to boards which, based on our SID conference survey yesterday, seem to be less aware. But there were a lot of questions on that particular survey also. So in terms of the organization as a whole, right? Are there organization cultures which are more, which are better, in developing digital trust than the other cultures? How do you? I mean, we've got the CFO's role, we've got the board's understanding, but now we come to the organization itself. How do we build trust within the organization? Are there some initial factors within the organization which will propel particular organizations faster on the road to evolve digital trust than others? Are there some attributes of the organization? What are the attributes of the organization that will engender digital trust?
I mean, you bring out a good point. It's very easy to say that we want to go for a digital transformation. And being a consultant, and what I realized that a lot of time, I did talk about implementation difficulty. And at the end of the day, it's the people that whether it will make a difference or not.
Digital grunt, digital groan?
So I think that the difference, whether is it successful or not, is the people. But how do we make the changes? I always believe that tone at the top is very important. The management can spend all their time talking about digital trust training or agenda transformation, that sort of thing. If the senior management don't walk the talk, it's not going to happen. Okay, that's one. Secondly is that I also think that to make sure that it works, it has to impact the whole organization. Everybody has to believe in it, from the top right up to the bottom, which means that there has to be programs to help each of everybody at different level in terms of how to make sure digital trust is part of the agenda. And thirdly, I think that a lot of organizations realize that if you want to go into the digital agenda, you must be prepared to take on failure. And so organizations like we traditionally don't like failure. One strike, you're out. Probably a lot of organizations are saying that 2 strike, basically. You get a warning, or you learn. As long as you learn from your failure, there is a chance that you will be more successful.
So I'm going to take it from a different perspective, but the same way of looking at it. So the way I look how organizations build trust is from 2 angles. First is looking at their business strategy, being very clear in terms of how you're adding value, what products and services are you selling, and how you actually build trust. You then put that together with the operation in terms of your operation model, your people, your technology, and the distribution. So with having very clear understanding of what your strategy is, and then aligning that strategy to your operational model, and at the same time underlying and cutting right through it, you have trust. So that's the way I think how organizations are moving forward. However, clearly some organizations are already in situ, which then it has to move reverse.
Anybody else?
Yeah, just to answer your question, I think some organizations have a natural bias and a natural relevance as to why they want to adopt it faster. The old economic companies may probably, with tangible goods and services, may find it a little late to, sort of slow to move on it. And I have a positive bias because we are in the industry and we are selling solutions and teaching people how to be savvy as far as digital awareness and digital trust is concerned. So, but companies like the eBays of the world and the Ubers and the Airbnbs, where their whole business model relies on the digital trust, for them, the urgency and the perspective, and it's all encompassing. It goes all across the organization.
Mm-hmm. So I was just going to add 2 things. So I think one, it's ignoring digital or not. I think it comes down to the value system within the organizations. The values of the company are critical, because they influence how people make decisions, how people think day to day as they respond, they react to situations. Because that's, unfortunately, there's going to be things that happen that don't necessarily go well, but how you respond to that is critical. And we've seen that through some of the incidents. Some companies have responded very well, others have not. I think beyond that, the second key thing, which is tone at the top, but looking at the top, particularly senior management, the skill set and the understanding of what digital is, what it's not, that's critical. Because you don't have that vision, you don't have that perspective and the knowledge, that makes it very difficult as well. So it's sort of the value, but also having that knowledge in the organisation and seeking out and actively getting that knowledge in the organisation.
Come back to that in terms of, I think that it's not true that once you break it, you can't recover, actually, in terms of trust. Because it depends on how you respond to it. Because it's that increasingly in a complex world, things will break down. No doubt about it, okay? And I think that people are smart enough to know that you are allowed to break down. But actually how you respond to those breakdowns are important, and that will create the trust agenda. Why I say that is that in UK you have different train company. some of the company that break down and they didn't communicate well, they didn't compensate the customer well, they actually destroy the trust. However, there's some company actually when they break down and they actually do a good communication, they actually make sure that there's aftercare in terms of customer. That actually retains the trust because the customer thinks that they actually care for them. So I think that we have to be careful to say that it's not that you cannot have a breakdown or in your system, that sort of thing. It's how you manage that, the whole end-to-end that is important.
Yeah, I would second that point, Vincent. It's a very good point that you pointed out that, it's how do you respond quickly? It's like how the importance is to communicate that the trust is broken, and how do you respond to it to make sure you're doing all the safety measures, you're doing the firefighting to make sure, and how do you actually rebuild that trust. But more importantly is actually, have you learned from that mistake? And how do you actually put the brakes in your system not to have the same or similar mistakes in the future?
Maybe just a couple of points in there. So one, through the instance we've seen in Singapore over the last few years, the response to the company's post has been very good and really helped them grow. But another example, maybe just go to the US, and we talked about autonomous cars before. So Google had a lot of issues with the autonomous car. It pulled in front of the bus. It said the bus should have slowed down. It didn't. But one of the issues for autonomous cars is who's the named driver? You can't, who's actually responsible and accountable? So Google's response is very innovative around that. And this is not using technology response. They just said, okay, at the end of the day, we're probably going to be the ones at fault. So now they're the named driver. Google, by taking on that emphasis of the named driver, makes it very easy for other automotive manufacturers to take that on board. Because being the named driver makes it easier for Toyota or Ford to adopt the technology, but also means they've now got to think through second-order issues, because now they're liable for accidents, and it's a programmed response. So who's going to insure them? So they've just painted a new bonnet for cars, which actually absorbs the impact of a person hitting it and makes you stick to it, because most of the impact is actually secondary, not primary. So as you start thinking through these things, it actually creates value for the organisation in terms of how you respond, how you act, and actually potentially creates more business in the long term.
I just wanted to add the context of that trust is also resilient, right? It bounces back. And the context I wanted to bring up was, I'm sure almost everyone here would be a member of LinkedIn. And 2012, they had a hack. 117 million records were hacked. And I don't think LinkedIn handled it well, by the way. That's what the reports say. 117 million out of 161 million members they had 4 years back. 73%. What would you expect? If trust wasn't resilient, you'd expect people to go away from LinkedIn. Today they have 443 million members, right? So obviously they did something right. They got some communication going. And similarly, people are still going back and withdrawing money from DBS ATMs, right? Right? It is not that people have gone away.
Can we have digital trust without digital resilience? I mean, you just answered that question. And it's good that you brought up the point about breakdowns and recovery and things like that. In your own experience, I mean, which part of the customer journey do you find that, where digital trust frequently breaks down? Where are the points, where are the weakest points? In the supply chain or in the customer's journey? Which are the, is there any Faye says that it can happen anywhere.
From my experience, it can happen anywhere, whether it's supplier or whether it's B2B. It depends. It's, perpetrators are not looking for one position. They're looking for the weakest link. So it can happen anywhere. So that's what my position is. But clearly,
I agree, because I think, and it's not even perpetrators. It can be in the organisation. I mean, the instance we're talking about, so the DBS one, which is very well documented, it was effectively an accident, internal, that just went wrong. So I think these things, it can be anywhere in the journey, but I do think when you look from a customer perspective, understanding how you interact, and I agree that trust is very resilient, but sometimes it's very fickle as well. So it's a question whether you want to take that risk or not.
Vincent, you seem to be having something.
No, I agree with all the panelists in terms of things can go wrong any place. But I also think that if we are using digital, people would expect that the unknown will happen and sometimes breakdown will happen. Okay? Regardless of all the control you have in place, I can guarantee you that there's 5% of unknown when you deal with digital. okay? And that's the part that we just have to live with it, because that's digital world. And that's why it's important to think about end-to-end. If you feel, what are the things that you have done to recover yourself to make sure that the customers still have the customer experience?
So maybe just one of the things that, and mentioned MAS before, and MAS being very focused on this as the lead regulator, and it's a very good standard what they do. But one of the things they recognise is not always digital work. One of the requirements in Singapore is that systems should be able to support the customer at their time in need. But often when we talk about system, it's not just technology. It can be other things. So for example, insurers, if their insurance systems go down, can I make a claim? Can I go to hospital and get treated? Well, actually, you've got a telephone you can call. There's other ways to do things and operate businesses on the offline. So I'm using my Airbnb. I'm going Airbnb in a week's time. If suddenly they're down and I can't find the place I'm going to go to because I'm relying for that to tell me the address, how I get in, etc., I have a problem. But if they've got a contact number, which they do, I can then call. So it's a combination of the online and offline world is very, very critical. Because from a customer standpoint, it's when those two depart. So the issue with DBS, I couldn't get money. There was no alternative money. If DBS had a mechanism to open the branches quickly and give me money, then it may have been less of an issue. So I think that's pretty key.
I just wanted to add that when you brought up Airbnb, I think by nature we are risk takers. There's the value of innovation which sort of propels us to go towards it and take some risks and offer our credit cards to people we don't even know, right? And then at the same time, we are also calculated risk takers. And this is episode just 2 weeks back, 10 days back, it was reported in the Sydney Morning Herald. A couple rented their apartment to someone who said they wanted the apartment because they wanted to take the child to a hospital. And what did happen was they were drug junkies and they used the apartment so badly, they broke everything and they left syringes. So in 2 weeks back, they came back and they found the apartment in a mess. And guess what? They probably know at the back of the hand that Airbnb has a home protection insurance. Right? Organizations do this. They realize that when people are trusting you, you have to back them up. So the home protection insurance offers owners and landlords a protection up to $1 million for every episode for body damage and property damage. And look, they're a little slow on reimbursing on that. But the fact of the matter is that we really, when we are not all that dumb when we take this risk, sometimes it comes to bite us. But we are probably sometimes aware there are safeguards involved in this. So I can list the number of the only paper I carried here was to list the number of organizations which have stumbled and fallen and have got their organizations going. Guys from PlayStation to the iCloud, everyone has made mistakes. But the fact is that they have done things right to fix it. And all of us are watching and enriching our experience to say, I should not make that mistake. But there isn't that it is the end of it all. And that's when the expectation management comes up.
So one last question before the Q&A, because you're talking about recovery. Yesterday I was talking to a lawyer about what do you do when something goes wrong. And he told me the biggest mistake that many of his clients make when things go wrong is to tell everything to the media, to sort of like, get the IT guy to tell to the media everything that went wrong in their system because it's going to cost them later. So he says that's where the lawyer comes in order to mediate and make sure that the recovery process is something that you can survive through. And of course, Vincent was speaking this morning. He was telling us that the chief executive of the CSA practices every morning, on how he's going to present himself to the media, So how do we recover? Is an apology sufficient? How do you recover? What was the process of recovery?
I think that you need more than apologies. You need to make sure that people know that you are in control of that problem and you're doing something to restore it. And you also need to make sure that the customer feels that you are thinking about them even during those recovery. But that's easier said than done, of course.
And of course, I won't ask Ganesh because then he has to draw on his own experience, which will say something. Of course, you have not.
I think it's a, what do you call an occupational hazard. I mean, if you're in this business, it's bound to happen. You're absolutely right. It's how maturely the organization handles it. In many of these episodes, I think you can pick and choose on how many people handle it. For example, the whole Snowden episode, NSA, telephone hacking, social media hacking, hacking prime minister's phones. I mean, look, do you think that it was really managed well, except that Obama telling Merkel, your phone is no longer tapped, right? You could sort of say that some of them are badly handled, some are well handled. For example, after the Apple hack, they introduced an optional two-step verification process. LinkedIn hasn't offered that, and people are saying, should they have done that? So these are all debates which will be there, but the most important thing is there an effort to say, I recognize your pain, and I'm trying to resolve this, and I'm trying to ensure it doesn't happen again. So those are, things which ultimately will see how long the stickiness in this fickle business continues, failing which eventually, if there is something better comes up, people will very promptly switch in the hope that that's more secure, more reliable, more credible.
Great. So, do you have anything there? Okay, so maybe I'll just turn to the audience to ask whether you have any questions. You can ask questions about what's happening in the panel discussion or even Vincent's presentation earlier on.
Mr. Moderator, I would like to put a couple of comments to the panel. The panel discussion is digital trust by design. And I would put forward to the panelists that if you're going to do any design, then you should have a methodology of looking at the digital world. And most of what you have discussed do not actually look at the characteristic of what is in a digital world. And may I just move on from where McLuhan have talked about in his 1990 classic, which is that the medium is the message. And that presupposes various classical channels of media communication, which is by voice, print, and video. But what has become a truism in the digital world is the message is actually embedded in this digital world. And the message actually becomes the medium rather than the other way around. So I propose that we should have a methodology by which we try as best as we can to identify the attributes. Now, I suggest a few attributes so that you can then, I suggest a few characteristics from which you can identify the characteristics and then the risks. I offer the following: accessibility, viral, instantaneous, response time, susceptibility, augmented reality. And what are these attributes to accessibility? I'll just discuss for one. It determines both the structure and the classification of information. So because Hillary Clinton wanted to have her own private access, that presupposes she understood well the classification of information which she's receiving as to whether what are personal information and what are classified as secret, and which is getting her into the trouble. And if you look at the way Donald Trump treats versus Hillary Clinton, Trump gets to the Twitter approach, which is very instantaneous, reflect his profile, whereas Hillary tweets are more structured, and most people reading it has a disconnect and dispose of it. So I would offer that to the panel for discussion.
Thank you. Yeah. So methodology and is the medium the message? I think you touched upon the methodology, and the attributes earlier on. Maybe you could elaborate in terms of accessibility and the different types of technologies and so on and so forth.
Can you just help me to understand what do you want to cover in that sense?
Yeah. So basically, I think the question is what is the methodology in terms of digital trust what are the processes, what are the priorities, and so on and so forth.
Actually, I'm
I was
gonna
going
add
to
just
say one thing very
Yeah.
quickly, because I think Singapore, actually, some people in this room are aware of it, but not necessarily everyone, is leading the way on the methodology piece. Sorry, can you hear me now? So I was just saying that Singapore is actually, maybe not known to many people, but is actually leading the world around a methodology and a framework to do these things. So in particular, in response to some of the incidents, the MAS has issued new rules, and this is in the financial sector, but the Association of Banks in Singapore actually developed a control framework which is around digital trust. And that goes to all aspects of organisation. So how the organisation runs itself, how it manages HR, how it onboards people, how it runs its technology, but how it deals with response time, how it deals with information assets, all those elements. And it's a framework that the ABS has developed, which then enables organisations that perhaps don't have massive compliance departments, teams, etc., to actually understand what are the fundamental controls I need from an organisation as I'm operating and providing services to others. So that's a fairly good, strong standard, but we are, in Singapore, the first country to actually build this out using international standards, but also looking at good practice from here and some of the events that have happened in the past.
And where do we access this methodology?
Mr. Jansen, could I just take you up on that? If you look at that digital world within banks and what MAS has prescribed, don't you think that the question of accessibility is of crucial importance? Accessibility to different levels of service channels within the bank, between wealth management, between corporate, private. So how would a institution that is a bank as compared to regulators who would want to say anti-money laundering background checks, and if you happen to get a Myanmar person, there are so many names that are similar. So you need to really also look at other attributes besides accessibility.
Agree 100%. I think some of that elements are more dealt through the financial crime frameworks around how people look and research that, and Vincent can sort of...
It has nothing to do with financial crime. It has to do with accessibility of information in the digital world within the banking institution themselves. So if you don't have a methodology of classifying the characteristic of the message in the digital world, you're not going to be able to identify the attributes and the risks.
Yes, so 100% agree. So I think it's back to understanding the value of the information you have, what information you have, how you keep it, who has access to it, and how the organisation uses it, and the complexity is the volume of information. So you're right, organisations do need to have methodology to understand this.
Okay, Vincent, anything else to add?
I'm sorry, maybe I'm a bit not myself. I don't understand what is your question in terms of, like, are you talking about, do we need accessibility framework, or do we? Yeah.
Mr. Lloyd, my comment is very simple. The topic of panel discussion is digital trust by design. Okay? So if you're looking at it from a designer's point of view, you must have a methodology by which you design.
Yeah.
Whether it's a top-down pyramidal or database or gel fashion that you do, but you must have a methodology of analyzing what is happening in the digital world. Okay, I'll give you another example. You have augmented reality, which is AR plus AI. Now, one of the attributes of that is you develop color vision. Individuals within that world will only see what is augmented. That there is a holistic detachment. They're not able to connect points, okay? And then when you get to that, you get data proliferation in the management of data coming from IoT. So what I'm trying to say is that if you're trying to design, you must have a methodology by which you analyze these various circles that you have. Because you're only describing the space, you're not describing the characteristics and the attributes and the risks. That's all I'm
Okay, understand that, and I totally agree with you in that. And now I understand is that, like you talk about, let's say, Internet of Things. You need to have a certain framework to actually help you to manage them. Am I right to say that?
But that will come true in a digital world in terms of augmented reality.
Yes.
The augmented reality in a driverless car is you don't take part in it. You're a passenger.
Yes.
But what happens if you get hit? What's the third party claim? The insurance?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question, and we can really go on, and on for quite some time because it covers so many different areas. But I'd like to give an opportunity for maybe others also to ask any questions if you have. Amos, maybe you can meet up with Vincent later and discuss in more detail.
I will have a simpler question. I think. It's more of a dollar and cents question. So based on the current digital landscape and the cyber threats and the counter threats that need to be addressed, this is probably one aspect of the business cost that has been understated. So from the panelists' experience, what do you think is the appropriate budget that need to be set aside by business to guard against and at least to provide some kind of a basic protection that trust will not be compromised?
Okay, let me try to answer that, okay? There are different benchmarks out there, okay? You have to treat benchmark with a pinch of salt. It really depends on the state where your company is at, the maturity your company is at. If you are a new company, you probably need to spend more money on security. If you're a company that have invested for some time, then you need less, okay? So I always tell people, be careful of benchmark. But at the moment, we did a study for, in fact, I sit on a committee for future economy for the Singapore government. And one of the things we look at in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of how much we spend on cybersecurity vis-a-vis our technology budget. At the moment, the average is around 2%, okay? 2% or 2 to 3%. And just to give you a benchmark, the government has committed themselves to spend about 8 to 10% of the IT budget on security, okay? But having said that, this is a very rough target that will change because once you invested, then you need less money in terms of the amount, basically. For banks, traditionally, they spend about 5% thereabout. For SME, it's much lower. But this will give you some sense in terms of, but I think at the moment people are looking at 8 to 10%, which is actually a big amount of money coming from where we are, which is around 2 to 3%.
Anybody else has any questions?
Good morning. Great insights. One question I have, and it's just more from an audit perspective. So, a lot of companies, we're very aware of the risk, and this is a top risk. But what I'm not so comfortable about is the expertise that we have in our company. And this is more around, Vincent and Mark. So I'd be curious, what type of background, skill sets do your groups have? The people, are the people from the audit? Are the people from IT? Are the process? How, as a company, how do I build that team and expertise to make sure we give that assurance?
Maybe it's in terms of, and the issue is endemic, it's an issue here and elsewhere in the world. So when we look through the graduates coming out, there's just simply not enough people who have some of the core skills, which is really around technology. But when we're looking at the graduates, we look at people who are doing technology degrees, computer engineering degrees. We're also looking for people who are doing business studies with technology elements in there as well. Because you need combination. If you've got purely just technology, sometimes it doesn't really help. But you need that combination of both. So just talking from a PwC perspective, we, over the last few years, have dramatically increased our recruitment of junior people because we recognise actually there is a big demand in the marketplace. Therefore, nice to think we can hold on to all of them, but the fact is we can't. And so it's just trying to beef that through because right now this is embedded in everything we do. You can't operate in any function in an organisation without really understanding technology.
I agree with Mark, but I think that we have to be realistic. We are not going to find one person who knows everything, okay? At the end of it, I suspect that we probably need to have a collection of people working in partnership to solve problems in terms of digital trust, okay? Because it's a business issue, so you need to have the business people, you need to have technology understanding, you need to have data analytics skills, that sort of thing. And much as I'd like to think that there's one person out there, I find it very difficult to find, and I think that it's easier for organization practically to get a collection of people, and those people should have a stake into making sure that the digital agenda is moving forward.
Another thing I would add to that is a diversity of teams working together, because even though you have somebody in finance, somebody who's in big data, somebody who's in technology, I'm sorry, but there's some, you may miss something that a historian could potentially provide you, or somebody who's understand how culture changed throughout the years, so and how it actually adapts to different environments and different people, because of globalizations continue to happen. I'm working with Vincent. Tomorrow I could be working with somebody else in another corner of the world. So it's understanding of having a very diverse team, but sharing the same values and sharing where do they want to take the business and what's important to the business.
Just 2 cents on the diversity thing. My personal experience always have a blend of millennials. Today, the way data is being used, the blur of social and work, and a lot of us allowing people to sort of bring their personal devices into work, and that sense of lack of informality which creeps into work, you need to recognize that, but that's how they deal with on a day-to-day basis, and they bring it into work. There are no dividing lines to say that now you're here, because they're just sort of living the digital age because they're millennials, which is, while we are different, we come here and we have a different perspective as to what we do in the work environment. We'd stop using abbreviations for one, and so on and so forth. But it's just that how the use happens. And the more important is easy to sometimes save stuff which is not supposed to be saved on your personal device. So the millennials are a great study. You should have them in your team.
I would actually challenge that, Ganesh. I would say that we shouldn't label them as millennials. Instead, for me, the way I look at it, they're part of the way we operate. It's just not because you're a millennial or he or she's a millennial, she can easily Instagram or put a Snapchat on. I'm sorry, it's just as easy for us to do. So I would challenge everybody in this room to actually learn what millennials do and not brand them as separate species, because they're not. It's part of our work. It's the way we live in today. So we should embrace it.
I'm not coloring them differently. I think
there's a battle going on.
I'm saying I recognize that's a reality. For that matter, all our applications, the interface is more designed to the millennials, right? Very recognize that that's the future workforce. How can we ignore them?
Actually, I agree with both. But is there one last question that we can ask, because we are running out of time? One last question and we will close up.
My question will be, what is your advice to the board or CFO change with the corporate's governance responsibility to face with, to prepare for themselves to this digital trust?
I think, from what I heard, I think it's the board's, it's corporate governance and the board's role.
I will try to answer that. And I think that I really think that you need to have a proper governance over digital transformation. And that means that roles and responsibility has to be clearly defined. And it should be driven by a board or management who steer the whole digital transformation. And the processes, the methodology, and the framework has to be in place before you even dive into that. Because it's a big transformation. It's probably very draining in terms of resourcing, but also in terms of finances. And that, as a result, the governance structure has to be in place. And the success of the digital transformation will depend on how effective that governance structure. And that governance structure needs to consider not only controls, but the business people, the technology people working together.
No, just to conclude, the digital age seems very contradictory. It's like a double-edged sword. It's got so many opportunities, but so much of risks. I mean, from the loss of personal privacy, right up to the risk that will come with the IoT, right? It's unthinkable, actually. I mean, right now, when you connect your devices to the internet, the cyber risk materializes into physical risk. You know, there are so many risks relating to the digital age which actually threaten digital trust. So as a final thought, maybe you could share or give some assurance to the audience that we can still maintain and build digital trust despite the challenges that the digital age poses.
Can I throw that, okay? And you bring up a good point. And my concern is that we spend so much time talking about digital transformation, digital age in terms of the opportunity out there. And I'd like to challenge everyone. It's not only about cyber risk, there is a lot more risk in terms of digital transformation. And have we thought through carefully about all this risk? And have we actually come up with a mechanism to manage this risk on an ongoing basis?
And Faye, your concluding statement?
My concluding statement would be, if we have to embrace change for starters, right? So why don't we just do what we need to do, and if we fail, it's all right. It's all right to fail, because that's how we learn. So that's my concluding statement.
Yeah, I think businesses have evolved and always have kept pace with what needs to be done at that particular point in time, and we're in that phase. And that's the recognition which we need to have. But the overarching thing is how transparent and clear about the expectations you're setting, and how you have your framework of ethics, and then you support that with a resilient technology, because we now are living in that age. So that, I think, is an imperative. We do not have a choice, and this is something which we will evolve, and who knows what waits for us next as business models evolve.
So maybe just two quick things from my perspective. One is just a philosophical point of view. Tomorrow is always another day. So we will continue on, no matter what, we'll continue on. So with that in mind, the most important thing is actually to get educated. So really about understanding what some of the words on the screen, they're understanding in particular Industry 4.0. That is one thing. If you don't know, research and read. But understanding, being educated, that's our job for the future, and that will help us the most.
I totally agree with Vincent about the fact that digital trust involves looking at more than just cybersecurity. Just take the case now between Apple and the EU in terms of tax, right? In terms of tax in Ireland, right? And not to mention the Panama Papers and so on and so forth. I mean, all these also could affect the trust in a company, trust in a brand. And I also like what the panel said about the CFO's role in leading and implementing digital trust as a catalyst in the organizations. So shall we, can you just join me in thanking the panel for a very insightful discussion? Mark? Thanks a lot. Thank you, Ganesh.
Thank you, everyone.